There are things a person learns to carry without ever putting them down. Nellie had carried hers since she was 9 years old. The particular silence of a house that no longer wanted you. The careful way you learn to shrink, to soften footsteps, to breathe without taking too much air. She had carried it through 10 years of service in Ashford Keep, through cold mornings and stone floors, through the smell of lye soap and wood smoke that had permanently settled into the fabric of her skin. She carried it so well that most people forgot she was there at all. That, she had always thought, was the safest way to be. She was wrong. The night it happened, Nellie was doing what she always did after the last candles in the eastern corridor were trimmed, moving quietly through the dark like something that belonged to it. The keep was different at this hour. During the day it breathed with noise, boots on flagstone, council voices bleeding through oak doors, the clatter of the kitchen below, the sharp bark of guards changing rotation. But late at night, Ashford Keep became something older, something with teeth. The torches burned low and the shadows stretched long against the stone walls, and the tapestries, enormous things depicting old wars and older wolves, seemed to shift when no one was looking directly at them. Nellie had stopped being afraid of that years ago. She moved through the corridor with a small basket of folded linens pressed against her hip, her soft-soled boots making almost no sound. Her dark hair was braided back, and her gray wool dress, the uniform of the lower staff, was worn thin at the elbows from years of scrubbing and carrying and bending. She was 23 years old, and had the posture of someone who had spent most of those years trying to take up as little space as possible. The young heir's chamber was at the end of this hall. Lord Kane, 5 years old, the only legitimate son of Lord Harwick of Ashford, a thin-blooded nobleman who had once claimed distant kinship to the Wolf bloodlines and used that claim to build a life of considerable comfort. Nellie had been assigned to the boy's care for 2 years. She fed him, dressed him, told him stories when the nightmares came, and sat outside his door when the thunder rolled in from the eastern mountains. She didn't let herself love him. She had tried not to. She knew better than to love things that didn't belong to her. But when she pushed open the door to his room that night, and the smell hit her, thick and acrid, the unmistakable bite of burning, her body moved before her mind could weigh the consequences. The curtain beside the boy's bed was on fire. It had caught from the candle left too close on the side table. She saw it in an instant, the fallen taper, the flame already climbing the heavy velvet drape, the orange light spreading with terrible quiet. The boy was still asleep. The smoke hadn't reached him yet. The fire had not. Nellie crossed the room in 4 steps, grabbed the burning curtain with both hands and yanked. The pain was immediate and total. The fire bit into her palms and fingers with a ferocity that took her breath. Not a sharp pain, but a deep, consuming one, the kind that erased everything else. She pulled the burning fabric away from the wall, away from the bed, and beat it against the stone floor until the flame choked and died under the weight of her body and the thick wool rug she smothered it with. It took less than a minute. When it was over, she was on her knees on the floor, her hands trembling, blisters already forming across both palms from the base of her fingers to her wrists. The smell of burned fabric and scorched skin filled the room. The boy was awake now, sitting upright in his bed with wide, frightened eyes. "Nellie," he whispered. "You're safe," she said. Her voice came out steady. She didn't know how. "Go back to sleep." She wrapped her hands in the cold linen from her basket and sat outside his door until the shaking stopped. She didn't report the fire that night. She should have. She knew she should have. A fire in the heir's chamber, even a small one, even one already extinguished, was the kind of event that required documentation, inquiry, a formal account given to the head of household. Protocol existed for reasons. But Nellie also knew what happened to servants who caused disruptions, who drew attention, who made themselves visible in the wrong way at the wrong time. She wrapped her hands tighter and said nothing. By morning, her palms were a ruin of blistered skin and raw red tissue, and she could barely close her fingers around the handle of a water pitcher. She had wrapped them in linen strips torn from an old underskirt, and she kept them hidden under the cuffs of her sleeves when she moved through the corridors. She thought she had escaped notice. She was wrong about that, too. Lord Harwick summoned her to his private study 3 days later. Nellie stood before the carved oak desk with her hands folded in front of her, painful still, burning at every slight pressure, and kept her face smooth and her eyes low. The study smelled of pipe resin and leather, and the particular cold particular to rooms where men made decisions about other people's lives. Harwick was a broad man going soft at the edges, his dark hair salted at the temples, his expression carrying the permanent look of someone who considered himself generous, while spending as little as possible on that generosity. He was looking at her now with something she couldn't name immediately. It took her a moment to identify it, because she had so rarely seen it directed at her. Calculation. "I've heard what you did," he said. Nellie said nothing. "The curtain, the fire, my son." He picked up a letter from the desk and turned it over in his hands without opening it. "You acted quickly. The boy could have been hurt." "Yes, my lord." "I've also heard your hands are damaged." "They are healing, my lord." He nodded slowly. His eyes hadn't left her face. "I've been thinking," he said, "about your position here." Something tightened in Nellie's chest, but she kept her expression even. "My lord, you've served this house well, quietly, faithfully." He set the letter down. "I think it's time that service was rewarded with something more permanent." She waited. "I intend to have you formally bonded to this household, not as a servant, but as a ward. It would give you legal protection, shelter, a formal name within this estate." He folded his hands. "In exchange, you would of course continue in your current duties, with expanded responsibility, naturally. The heir requires someone reliable near him at all times." Nellie heard the words. She heard what they were meant to sound like. Generosity. Reward. Elevation. She also heard underneath them something else. The quiet closing of a door. A ward of the household could not leave without permission, could not contract herself elsewhere, could not petition independently. A ward was, in all the ways that mattered, still a servant, only one with fewer options and a prettier title. She thought of the fire, of the way the smoke had smelled, of the candle that had been placed, she now realized, slightly too close to the curtain, slightly too deliberately. She thought of the letter in Harwick's hand. "I'm very grateful, my lord," she said quietly. "Might I have a day to consider it?" His expression didn't change. "Of course," he said. "Take the evening." She left the study with her burned hands folded against her stomach, and the slow, cold weight of understanding settling into her bones. The letter was the thing. She knew it, the way she sometimes knew things. Not through reason, but through the particular chill that moved down her spine when something was wrong. She had always had that. A sharpness in the intuition that caught at loose threads before she could name them. It had kept her out of trouble more times than she could count. It had never felt like a gift. It felt like being haunted by things that hadn't happened yet. That night, she slipped back into the study. She wasn't proud of it. She was practical about it. The letter was still on the desk, unsealed now, waiting for its answer to be written. Nellie held her breath and read it in the low light of a single candle, her burned fingers trembling against the paper. It was not addressed to her. It was addressed to someone called Lord Fenwick, of a territorial seat 2 days' ride east. The handwriting was Harwick's. The language was careful, formal, the kind of language used between men who knew exactly what they were doing. "The girl is useful," it read, "and the timing is favorable." After the incident, Her value has become apparent to certain parties. I am prepared to arrange a formal transfer of wardship if the terms we discussed are met. She is unmarked, unbonded, and carries no formal bloodline documentation. There will be no complications. Nellie read it twice. Then, a third time. She is unmarked, unbonded, carries no formal bloodline documentation. There will be no complications. She set the letter down. Her hands were shaking. Not from pain this time. She had saved the boy. She had burned her hands to ash doing it. And within 3 days of that, Harwick had seen not a girl worth protecting, but a girl worth selling. Quietly. Legally. A ward transferred to another man's keeping, with no family to question it, no bond to contest it, no bloodline record to complicate the transaction. She had burned for this house. And this house had looked at the burns and seen opportunity. Nellie stood in the dark study for exactly as long as it took her to stop shaking. Then she went upstairs, took the small cloth pouch of coin she had saved over 3 years from a loose stone behind her cot, wrapped her ruined hands in fresh linen, pulled her traveling cloak from its hook, and walked out of Ashford Keep through the kitchen door. The night was cold and moonless, and smelled of pine and distant rain. She didn't look back. The road east was the wrong direction. Nellie knew that before she took her first step onto it, which was precisely why she went west. If Harwick discovered her missing before morning, and she gave herself perhaps 4 hours before someone noticed the empty cot, his first assumption would be that she had run toward the nearest town, which lay east along the main road. It was the logical choice. It was the choice a frightened girl with no connections and no plan would make. Nellie was frightened, but she was not without a plan. She moved west along the tree line, keeping off the road entirely, her boots finding the soft earth between the roots where her footsteps left the least impression. The forest that bordered Ashford's western wall was old-growth pine, dense and dark, and it smelled of resin and cold soil and the faint mineral sharpness of a coming frost. Branches closed overhead. The sky disappeared. She didn't need to see the sky. She had walked this tree line in daylight enough times to carry its shape in her body. Her hands were the problem. The cold air hit the bandaged palms like something deliberate and cruel, finding every nerve ending that the fire had left exposed and pressing into them with methodical precision. She kept her arms close to her body, elbows tucked, trying to preserve what warmth she could. But the pain was a constant low roar beneath every thought, not sharp enough to stop her, not dull enough to ignore. She focused on her breathing instead. In through the nose, out slow. She had learned that too, somewhere in the 10 years of keeping quiet. How to breathe through the things that hurt without letting them show on her face. By the time the sky began to lighten at the edges, a thin gray seam between the black of the pines and the slightly less black of the clouds above, she had put nearly 6 miles between herself and Ashford Keep. 6 miles was not enough. She knew that. A man on horseback could cover that distance in under an hour. But 6 miles of forest and frost with no clear tracks was something, and she held on to that something as she stopped beside a narrow stream to rewrap her hands with the spare linen she had pocketed before leaving. The water was shockingly cold. She used it anyway, carefully peeling back the old wrapping and letting the stream run over her palms for a few seconds, the shock of it momentarily overriding the burn underneath, the way a harder pain can sometimes silence a softer one. She looked at her hands in the pale early light. They were worse than she had let herself think. The blisters had broken overnight, leaving raw, weeping skin across both palms and the undersides of her fingers. The outer edge of her left hand, where she had pressed hardest against the burning fabric, was an angry, dark red that she had no medical word for, but that her body understood as serious. She rewrapped them carefully, tightly, and kept moving. She reached the village of Creswick by mid-morning. It was a small place. One main road, with a tavern, a smithy, a dry goods merchant, and a scattering of homes built close together as if for warmth. The kind of village that noticed strangers but rarely reported them. Because the people who lived in places like Creswick understood that the wrong eyes could turn toward any of them on any given morning. Nellie kept her hood up and her burned hands inside her sleeves. She had 11 coins. It was not much. It was also everything she had. She spent 2 of them on a heel of bread and a cloth-wrapped portion of hard cheese from the merchant, eating both, standing in the narrow alley beside the building, with the focused, mechanical efficiency of someone refueling rather than eating. She spent a 3rd coin on a small jar of rendered lard, mixed with something that smelled of calendula, which an older woman at the market stall pressed into her hands after one glance at the way Nellie was holding them. "Fire?" the woman said. "Accident," Nellie said. The woman's expression held no judgment. She closed Nellie's fingers around the jar and turned away without asking anything else. Nellie stood in the alley for a moment longer than she needed to, the small jar warm in her wrapped hands, and felt the unfamiliar and slightly destabilizing sensation of being helped by someone who wanted nothing in return. She couldn't afford to stay in the village. By afternoon, Harwick's men would have the main roads covered. Creswick was small enough that a single inquiry from a lord's rider would shake loose any memory of a dark-haired girl in a gray cloak. She needed to move deeper, and she needed to move now. The thing her intuition caught at, 2 hours later, was a sound. She was back in the trees by then, moving parallel to the western road at a distance of perhaps 30 yards, keeping the road in sight, but staying off it. The forest here was different. Older, the pines giving way to massive oaks, the canopy thicker, the light on the ground reduced to scattered gray patches. It smelled of wet bark and decaying leaves, and something underneath both of those things. Something she had no name for. A deep, almost electric sharpness, like the air before lightning. She stopped. The sound came again, not behind her, ahead and slightly to the left, off the road entirely, deeper in the trees. A child's voice. Nellie stood very still and processed this information with the careful logic of someone who had learned that nothing in a forest at midday was straightforwardly what it sounded like. But it came a 3rd time, and this time there was a quality to it that bypassed logic entirely, and went straight to whatever instinct had once moved her across a burning room without thinking. She moved toward it. The boy was perhaps 7 years old, sitting at the base of a massive oak, with his back against the roots and his arms wrapped around his knees. He was dressed in clothing that was far too fine for these woods. Dark wool, silver buttons, boots that had cost more than Nellie's entire coin pouch. His face was streaked with dirt, and what had been tears, now dried. He was not crying anymore. He was past crying. He had the white shuttered look of a child who had used up everything and was now simply waiting. Beside him, on the ground, was a dog. Except it was not a dog. Nellie recognized this in the same moment she recognized the child. Not by sight, because she had never seen either of them before, but by the particular quality of the animal's stillness. It was too large for a dog, its coat silver-gray with a darkness along the spine, its eyes a pale amber that caught the filtered light with a quality that no dog's eyes possessed. It was lying pressed against the boy's side, and it raised its head when Nellie approached, and the look it gave her was not the look of an animal. It was the look of something that was deciding about her. She stopped 10 feet away and held herself very still. "I won't hurt him," she said quietly. She wasn't sure if she was speaking to the wolf, or to the child, or to the forest itself. The boy looked up. His eyes were dark and exhausted. "He's protecting me," he said. "He's been protecting me since they—" He stopped. His jaw tightened with the particular effort of a young person trying not to come apart. "Since the horses ran." "Where are the rest of your people?" Nellie asked. "I don't know." The word no cracked slightly at the end. "There was something on the road. The horses panicked. I fell." He swallowed. I've been here since before dawn. Before dawn, 6 hours, perhaps 7. A child alone in these woods for 7 hours. In fine clothing that announced his value to anyone who came across him, with only a wolf between him and whatever might have found him first. Nellie looked at the wolf again. The wolf looked back at her with those pale amber eyes, and something about the quality of that gaze, steady, assessing, deeply intelligent, sent a slow ripple of unease across her skin that she could not explain and did not try to. "Can you walk?" she asked the boy. "Yes." "Then walk with me. We'll find the road." The boy stood. The wolf rose with him, enormous in its full height, pressing close to the child's left side. It did not move away from Nellie. It didn't threaten her. It simply stayed between her and the boy with the calm, absolute certainty of something that had decided this was its position and saw no reason to negotiate. Nellie found she didn't mind it. There was something in that steadiness that she recognized, the particular quality of a presence that did not need to announce itself. She led them back toward the road. They heard the riders before they saw them. The sound came from the north. Multiple horses, moving fast, the kind of speed that had nothing casual in it. Nellie pulled the boy behind a broad oak instinctively, her burned hand closing around his fine wool sleeve. The wolf pressed close. For a moment, the three of them stood absolutely still in the shadowed space between the roots while the sound grew closer. Then the riders came into view through the trees, and Nellie saw the standard on the nearest man's cloak. A wolf's head, silver on black, beneath a crown. Not Harwick's men. Something else entirely. The riders slowed. The lead horse, black, enormous, ridden by a man whose breadth of shoulder suggested he was not, in any way, merely a rider, turned from the road toward the trees with the kind of certainty that indicated he had not found them by chance. He stopped 20 feet away. The wolf beside the boy made a sound that was not a growl. It was lower than that, more like a recognition. The man on the horse looked down at the boy first. His expression, what Nellie could see of it in the shadow of his hood, shifted with a quality she could only describe as controlled relief. The emotion of someone who had been containing something very tightly and had just found a reason to release it by a fraction. Then he looked at her. His eyes were pale, amber, or close to it, calm in the way that deep water is calm, not because nothing moves in it, but because everything that moves in it is too substantial to disturb the surface. "The boy is unhurt?" he said. His voice was quiet and entirely without performance. "Yes," Nellie said. He held her gaze for a moment longer than the question required. "And you?" he said. Nellie became aware, in that moment, of her own appearance. The worn gray cloak, the hidden bandaged hands, the 6 miles of forest floor on her boots, the breadcrumbs still on her collar. She looked, she knew, like precisely what she was, a woman with nothing and nowhere, who had been moving away from something rather than toward anything. "I'm fine," she said. It was the same voice she had used in Harwick's study. Steady, giving nothing. The man on the horse said nothing for a moment. He was still looking at her, and whatever he was seeing, his expression didn't shift to the thing she was accustomed to seeing in men who outranked her. Dismissal, impatience, the particular blindness of people who didn't need to pay attention. He was paying attention. "You're bleeding through your bandages," he said quietly. Nellie looked down. He was right. A dark stain had soaked through the linen on her left palm, blooming red against the white. She said nothing. He dismounted. She took a step back when he dismounted. She couldn't help it. It was not a decision. It was the body doing what the body had learned, the automatic recalibration of distance that happened whenever a large, powerful man moved suddenly in her direction. She had no conscious fear of him in that moment. She had something older than fear. the practiced geometry of someone who had spent years managing proximity. He noticed. She saw it in the way he stopped, planting both feet on the ground and going completely still. Not performing stillness, simply becoming it, the way a tree is still. Not because it has suppressed movement, but because it has no need of it. He did not close the distance she had created. That, more than anything else, was what made her stay where she was. His men had stopped behind him on the road, 6 riders holding their horses with the practiced quiet of a guard that had learned not to move without signal. The Silver Wolf standard caught the pale midday light. Nellie registered all of this in the peripheral way she registered most things, catalogued, filed, ready to be used. The man himself was looking at the boy now, crouching down in a single fluid motion to meet the child at eye level. "Edric," he said. One word, quietly spoken, but with something underneath it that Nellie felt in her sternum. The boy, Edric, made a sound that was entirely unlike the controlled silence he had maintained for the past hour, and collapsed forward into the man's arms, with the particular abandon of a child who has held himself together long past what a child should be asked to hold. The man caught him and held him without a word. One large hand settled across the back of the boy's head. He didn't say "it's fine" or "you're safe," or any of the hollow phrases that adults offered children in place of presents. He simply held him with the steadiness of someone who understood that sometimes the body needed to be given something solid before the mind could begin to settle. Nellie watched this and kept her face neutral and felt something shift in her chest that she immediately locked back into place. After a moment, the man looked up at her over the boy's head. "He is my ward," he said. "He was traveling under my protection when the convoy was attacked this morning." Attacked. Not. The horses panicked. Attacked. "I found him in the woods," Nellie said carefully. "He had been there several hours." "I know." Something moved behind those pale eyes. "We have been searching since before dawn." He paused. "You kept him safe." "The wolf kept him safe," she said. "I only found him." The man's gaze moved to the silver wolf, which had settled back on its haunches now that Edric was no longer alone. Something passed between the man and the animal. Not words, but the particular quality of communication that didn't require them. Then he stood, Edric still close at his side, and looked at Nellie directly. "You're hurt," he said. Not an observation seeking confirmation, a statement that expected a response. "It's manageable." "It isn't," he said. "I can smell the infection from here." Nellie went very still. She had tried not to think about infection. She had been trying not to think about a great many things, and that particular one she had placed firmly in the category of problems to address once there was somewhere safe to address them. She had no idea when that place might materialize. She had 8 coins, and a jar of calendula lard and the clothes on her back. She said nothing. "My camp is 2 miles north," he said. "There is a physician. The boy needs to be checked. You will come." It was not a question. It was also... She noticed this with the careful attention she gave to such things. Not a command issued with the expectation of blind compliance. There was something in it that was closer to a fact. This is what is going to happen, and I am telling you, so that you can prepare yourself rather than be surprised by it. She considered her options with the speed of long practice. She had nowhere to go. Her hands were infected, and she had 8 coins, and Harwick's men were somewhere on the eastern road. The man in front of her wore a crown device on his standard and had a wolf that was not a wolf, and something in the quality of the air around him made the fine hair on her arms rise with a slow, electric awareness she did not fully understand. She did not trust him, but she trusted the way he had stopped moving when she stepped back. She trusted the way he had caught the boy without performance. She trusted, in some wordless animal way. The fact that the silver wolf had pressed against her knee without threat the entire walk back to the road. 2 miles, she said. Yes. I walk. He held her gaze. Something that might, in another face, have become a smile did not quite become one. As you prefer, he said. The camp was larger than she expected. It was set in a natural clearing 1/2 mile from the road, sheltered by a dense stand of oak on 3 sides and a low ridge on the 4th. Perhaps 40 tents, she estimated, not the rough canvas of a traveling party, but the organized, methodical arrangement of a permanent field command, fire pits ringed with stone, horses on proper lines, a structure in the center that served as a command pavilion. Discipline showed in every detail. No mud tracked carelessly through the pathways. No equipment left without purpose. Voices kept at a register that didn't carry past the tree line. The people who looked up as she entered behind Edric and the man, she still did not know his name, and she had not asked, and he had not offered, looked at her with the same quality of attention his guard had shown on the road, watchful, assessing, but without the reflexive dismissal she was used to receiving in fine households. They were looking at her as if they were genuinely trying to determine what she was, which was disconcerting, because she was fairly certain she presented as quite obviously a servant who had recently been through something difficult. The physician was a woman in her 50s with short gray hair and the unhurried efficiency of someone who had been doing this work long enough to have stopped being theatrical about it. She looked at Nellie's hands for approximately 4 seconds and then began preparing a basin and instruments without fanfare. "Sit," she said. Nellie sat. The cleaning took the better part of an hour, and it was, she would not have admitted this to anyone present, one of the most painful experiences she had endured in a conscious state. The physician worked with precision and without apology, which Nellie respected, and the silence between them was functional rather than cold. When it was over, her hands were wrapped in clean linen soaked in something that smelled of honey and crushed yarrow, and the deeper burn on her left palm had been treated with a preparation that the physician applied without explanation, and which cooled the roaring heat underneath to something almost bearable. "These will heal," the physician said, wrapping the last bandage. "The left will scar. You'll have full use of both." "Thank you," Nellie said. The physician looked at her for a moment, a look that took in the worn dress and the traveling cloak, and the posture of someone long accustomed to occupying a corner, and said nothing further. But she pressed a small pot of the honey preparation into Nellie's hands before she left, and that wordless gesture landed in the same place as the calendula lard from the old woman in Creswick, and Nellie found she had to look at the pavilion wall for a moment. He came to find her as the light was failing. She was sitting outside the physician's tent on a low wooden bench, her newly wrapped hands resting in her lap, watching the camp settle into its evening routine, with the focused attention she gave to all new environments. The fire nearest her smelled of birch and something savory from the cooking pot. Somewhere beyond the tree line, an owl had begun. He sat down on the other end of the bench without preamble. Nellie didn't move away this time. She noted that she didn't, and filed it without comment. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He sat with the same ease he seemed to carry everywhere. Not the practiced ease of a man performing relaxation, but the genuine quality of someone who had no gap between how he felt and how he held himself. "Edric is well," he said. "I'm glad. He told me how you found him." A pause. "He told me about the wolf." Nellie said nothing. "He also told me you were alone, that you came from the west, not from any road." He didn't look at her when he said this. He was watching the fire. That is not the direction people usually travel when they are simply passing through. She kept her voice level. People travel in many directions. "They do," he agreed. He said it without irony, without pressure, and left the silence open. It was the openness of the silence that did it. Not a trap. Not an invitation designed to extract something. Simply space. offered without condition. She looked at her wrapped hands. "I was in service," she said. "At Ashford Keep. I left." "Left," he said. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "Harwick's house," he said. Something in her went cold and careful. "You know it. I know of it." His voice had not changed. "I know of Harwick." She waited. "He is a man," he said, with a measured quality that told her the simplicity of the words was doing a great deal of work, "who has presented himself to several councils as a loyal subject while conducting arrangements that suggest a different set of loyalties entirely." Nellie thought of the letter. She is unmarked, unbonded, carries no formal bloodline documentation. There will be no complications. She thought of Lord Fenwick, Eastern Seat, 2 days' ride. "The man he was writing to," she said carefully. "Lord Fenwick, is he—" The man on the bench turned to look at her for the first time since he had sat down. His pale amber eyes in the firelight were sharp and entirely still. "Where did you hear that name?" he said. "I read a letter," she said, "before I left." The quality of his stillness changed. It was not threatening. It was the focused attention of someone who had just received information they had been looking for and was reorganizing around it. "What did the letter say?" he asked. Nellie looked at him, at the silver wolf standard on the tent behind them, at the crown device she had been carefully not thinking about the implications of since the road. "Who are you?" she said. It was the first direct question she had asked him. He met it without hesitation. "My name is Kyle," he said. "I am the Alpha King of the Northern Territories." The fire popped. The owl called again from the dark. Nellie absorbed this information with the same contained, careful stillness she brought to everything. Then she said, "The letter said I was unmarked and unbonded, and that there would be no complications." Something moved across Kale's face, controlled but not entirely suppressible. Not anger at her. Something colder, directed elsewhere. "Tell me everything," he said quietly. So she did. She told him everything in the same voice she used for most things. Level, economical, without decoration. She told him about the fire in Edric's room. Not Edric. She had not known who the boy was then, only the heir of Ashford. And about the candle placed too close, and about the 3 days of silence before Harwick summoned her. She told him about the study and the offer of wardship, and the letter she had read by candlelight with burned hands that could barely hold the paper. She did not tell him about the fear. She saw no reason to. When she finished, Kale was quiet for a long moment. The fire had burned lower. The camp around them had settled into the particular nighttime register of men who slept lightly and woke fast. Not silence exactly, but a compression of sound, as if the clearing itself were paying attention. "Fenwick," he said finally. The name landed in the cold air like something being set down with deliberate care. "He has been under observation for 6 months. We suspected he was building a network of informal holdings, people without bloodline documentation, without formal bonds, without legal standing to contest a transfer of custody." He paused. "We did not know Harwick was one of his suppliers." Suppliers. The word arrived in Nellie's chest with a flat, precise weight. She had understood what the letter meant. She had understood it clearly enough to leave that same night. But hearing it named, the transaction it described reduced to a single word that made the shape of it undeniable, was a different experience entirely. She kept her face even. "How many?" she asked. "We don't know yet." He looked at her. That is the honest answer. She appreciated the honesty. She did not say so. "The fire," he said after a moment. "You said the candle was placed too close." "I said it seemed deliberate." "Yes." He was quiet again, and she could see him working through something, not performing thought, but actually doing it. the way people did when the pieces of a thing were rearranging themselves into a shape they hadn't expected. Harwick's heir. If the boy had died in that fire, Harwick would have had cause to pursue a claim of negligence against the household staff, Nellie said, which would have given him legal grounds to void any employment contracts and reclassify servants as wards under emergency provision. She paused. I read the household law documents when I first arrived. I had nothing else to do in the evenings. Kyle looked at her with an expression she had not yet seen on him. It was not quite surprise. It was the recalibration of someone who had formed a working estimate and found it needed adjusting upward. You read the household law documents, he said. I like to understand the rules of any place I live in, she said. It helps to know which ones are being bent. He said nothing for a moment. Then, the fire was not an accident. It was a mechanism, and you destroyed the mechanism by saving the boy. And made myself visible doing it, Nellie said, which is why he moved so quickly. Yes. Something hardened in Cale's voice, not toward her, but past her, in the direction of Ashford Keep and everything it contained. He needed to act before you could speak to anyone, before anyone noticed what you might have seen. She thought of standing in the kitchen doorway with her burned hands and her traveling cloak and 8 coins, walking into a moonless night because the alternative was waiting to be sold. I noticed plenty, she said quietly. I just had no one to speak to. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the camp, a horse shifted on its line. You do now, Kyle said. She didn't sleep well. They had given her a tent, small, clean, with a bedroll and a blanket that smelled of wool and cedar. And she had lain in it for what felt like most of the night, watching the shadows move on the canvas walls and turning the shape of her situation over in her mind with the methodical care of someone taking inventory. She was in the camp of the Alpha King of the Northern Territories. She had told him everything she knew. He had listened with the quality of attention that she associated with people who intended to use what they were told. Not against her, she thought, but certainly toward something. She had no formal standing here, no contract, no bond, no documented name. She was exactly what Harwick's letter had described, unmarked, unbonded, without documentation. The difference was that Cale had not looked at her the way Harwick had. She turned that over too, because she was honest enough with herself to examine the things that moved her rather than pretend they didn't. He had looked at her as if she were a person making decisions, not a problem to be managed. He had told her the truth when the truth was complicated. He had sat on the bench beside her without performing ease, and he had not filled the silences with reassurances designed to prevent her from thinking clearly. She did not trust this. She noted it, catalogued it, and reserved judgment. She had trusted Ashford Keep once. Not warmly, not with any illusion of family, but with the practical trust of someone who has calculated that a known situation is safer than an unknown one. That calculation had been wrong. She had learned something from being wrong, and what she had learned was that her calculations needed more variables. She flexed her bandaged hands carefully in the dark. Her left palm answered with a deep, pulsing ache. The physician's preparation had reduced the heat, but the damage underneath was real and would be real for some time. She would have scars. She had already made peace with that. Scars were just proof that something had happened. And she had never seen the value in pretending things hadn't. In the morning, Cale told her about her brother. She hadn't known he was looking. He had sent a rider the previous night, he said, after she told him which village she had come from before Ashford. A small village called Devon, 8 years ago. She had been 15 when the household arrangement was made. Her father recently dead, her mother long before that, and a younger brother of 11 left behind, with a distant aunt who had accepted a payment to take him in. The rider had returned before dawn. Cale found her at the edge of the camp, where she had gone to watch the morning come in over the ridge. He stood beside her, not too close, never too close without clear signal that it was acceptable, and told her what the writer had found. Her brother's name was Pell. He was 20 now. He had been in the aunt's household for 8 years, which was to say he had been in the same situation Nellie had been in. Not quite servant, not quite family, the in-between category that protected no one and obligated everything. He was alive. He was not well treated. He had, according to the writer's account from a village contact, been recently contracted out to work the eastern quarries under a labor bond that he had not signed of his own free will. Nellie stood very still while Cale told her this. She had thought about Pell every day for 8 years. She had sent coin when she could, small amounts, irregular, through a carrier she paid out of her own wages. She had told herself he was all right. She had told herself the aunt was adequate, if not kind. She had told herself because the alternative, that she had left a child behind in a bad situation and been too far away and too powerless to change it, was not something she could carry on top of everything else she was already carrying. She had been wrong about that too. "The quarry labor bond," she said. Her voice was very controlled. "Is it legally binding?" "Only if signed under witnessed consent," Cale said. "If it was coerced, it can be voided by territorial authority." A pause. "My authority." She turned to look at him. He met her gaze steadily. "I can have him out within 3 days," he said. "My riders are already east. It requires only the order." "Why?" she said. "Because it is the law," he said. "And because it is right." "You don't know me," she said. "You found me in a forest yesterday." "I know what you did in that forest," he said. "I know what you did in that house before you left it. I know what you read by candlelight with burned hands because no one else was going to look." He held her gaze. "I know enough." Nellie looked away from him. She looked at the ridge, at the thin, pale line of light coming over it, at the frost on the grass that was already beginning to melt in the morning warmth. She thought of Pell at 11, standing in the yard of the aunt's house watching the cart take her away, his face doing the same thing hers was doing right now, the controlled, careful work of not coming apart in front of people. "Give the order," she said. Edric found her after breakfast. He was a self-possessed child, quieter than she expected given his age, with dark eyes that had the particular quality of someone who had recently had something frightening happen and was still in the process of deciding how to file it. He sat down beside her on the log she had claimed near the central fire and didn't say anything for a moment. "You have a wolf," he said finally. Nellie looked at him. "I don't." "The silver one follows you," he said. "It slept outside your tent. I saw it." Nellie thought about the shape she had heard settling against the canvas wall sometime in the dark hours of the night, which she had told herself was the wind. "That wolf belongs to no one," she said carefully. "That's not true," Edric said, with the confident certainty of a child who has been raised in a world where such things have clear rules. "Wolves like that only follow their mate's mate." He paused. "Or their alpha's mate." Nellie said nothing. Edric looked at his hands. "Cale never lets it out of his sight," he said. "Except now." He glanced at her sideways, a look of pure, unperformed observation. "I thought you should know." He got up and went back to his breakfast with the unhurried dignity of someone who had delivered a message and considered his duty done. Nellie sat very still beside the fire for a long moment. Then she stood up, straightened her cloak, and went to find Cale. Not because of what the child had said, she told herself firmly, but because there was work to be done, and she intended to be part of doing it. She was not ready to think about the rest. She was not ready at all. Harwick had made a mistake. She had decided by midday. He had looked at her burned hands and seen only a transaction. He had not considered that she read household law documents for entertainment, that she had memorized the letter before replacing it, that she had 6 miles of forest navigation in her before he woke the next morning, that she had been quietly cataloging the wrongness of that house for longer than she had admitted even to herself. He had looked at her and seen someone who could be managed. He was about to discover the cost of that particular blindness. Cale had spread the letter's contents, which Nellie had reproduced from memory, word for word, sitting across from his second-in-command at the camp table with a scribe taking down every syllable, across his council that morning. By afternoon, 2 of his riders were bound for the eastern seat with sealed writs. By evening, a 3rd was carrying documentation to the territorial authority that governed Ashford Keep's jurisdiction. Nellie had sat in the council tent and answered every question put to her with the same precise economical accuracy she brought to everything. She watched the men around that table process the information she provided and reorganize their plans around it, and she felt something she had not felt in years, perhaps longer. She felt useful in a way that had nothing to do with carrying linens. Cale, across the table, had watched her throughout. When the council ended and the others filed out, he stayed behind, and for a moment they were alone in the tent with the maps and the candles and the smell of ink and cold wax. "You're not afraid of them," he said. It was not a compliment exactly. It was an observation with weight in it. "I'm afraid of plenty of things," she said. "Council tables are not among them." "What are you afraid of?" he asked. It was a direct question, asked without strategy, the same quality of simple open space he had offered the night before. She looked at him for a long moment. "Being wrong about people," she said. Again. He held her gaze, and he did not tell her she wouldn't be. He did not offer her the reassurance that would have cost him nothing and meant less. He simply looked at her with those pale amber eyes and nodded once, slowly, as if she had said something that required acknowledgement rather than correction. She left the tent before she could say anything else. Outside, the Silver Wolf was waiting. Pell arrived on the 4th day. Cale's riders had found him at the quarry site exactly as described. Thin, worn at the edges, with the particular careful blankness of someone who had learned to make himself small in a place that did not value him. He arrived on horseback behind one of the riders, and when he dismounted at the edge of camp and saw Nellie standing 20 feet away, he stopped completely. She stopped too. 8 years was a long time. He was not 11 anymore. He was taller than she expected, broader through the shoulders, with their father's jaw and their mother's eyes, and the look of someone who had been through enough to know that good things required verification before they could be trusted. She understood that look. She had been wearing it herself for years. She crossed the distance between them and put her arms around him carefully. Her bandaged hands pressed flat against his back, unable to grip properly, but present. And he made a sound that she felt in her ribcage, something between a breath and a word that never quite became either. They stood like that for a long moment in the cold morning air. "Your hands," he said finally, pulling back to look at them. "They're healing," she said. "What happened?" "A fire," she said. "I'll tell you everything. There's a great deal to tell." He looked at her face with the searching attention of someone reading for the truth beneath the surface. Whatever he found there seemed to satisfy him, because some of the tension in his shoulders released by a fraction. "Are you safe here?" he asked quietly. She thought about the answer with the honesty it deserved. "Yes," she said. "I believe I am." The formal proceedings against Harwick began 6 days after Nellie arrived in camp. Cale had moved the operation with a speed and precision that she had watched with something close to wonder, not the performed efficiency of men who needed to be seen acting, but the real thing. Decisions made cleanly, resources deployed without waste, every step connected to the next, with the logic of someone who had been doing this long enough to have internalized the shape of it. The territorial authority had received the documentation. The riders to the eastern seat had returned with confirmation that Fenwick's network was larger than suspected. 17 people in informal bondage across 4 holdings moved through a system of forged wardship papers and conveniently undocumented bloodlines. Harwick was one node in something that had been operating quietly for years beneath the surface of legitimate noble society. What broke it open was Nellie's testimony. She gave it formally, seated across from the territorial adjudicator in a room that smelled of old wood and candle wax, with Kyle's legal counsel beside her and Pell in the corridor outside. She spoke for 2 hours. She reproduced the letter word for word. She described the candle placement, the timeline of Harwick's summons, the language of the wardship offer, the specific phrasing that had told her what it really meant. The adjudicator was a gray-haired woman with the compressed efficiency of someone who had heard many accounts and learned to weigh them accurately. She listened without expression. When Nellie finished, she sat for a moment in silence. Then she said, "You memorized the letter?" "Yes," Nellie said, after reading it once, by candlelight, with burned hands. "Yes." A pause. "Continue," the adjudicator said, and something in her voice had shifted by a register that Nellie couldn't quite name, but recognized as significant. Harwick was arrested on the 8th day. Nellie was not there for it. She had been told she could be, had been offered the formal right of witness that territorial law extended to the primary complainant, and she had considered it for exactly as long as it took her to understand that watching Harwick be taken was not, in fact, what she wanted. What she wanted was for it to be finished. She was sitting by the river that ran along the eastern edge of camp when Cale found her, half a mile from the tents, on a flat rock above the water, watching the current move. Her hands were out of their bandages for the first time, the physician having declared them healed sufficiently for open air. The left palm carried a scar now, a pale, slightly irregular mark that ran from the base of her fingers to her wrist. She had looked at it that morning in the early light and felt no grief for it. It was simply part of the record. Kyle sat beside her on the rock, close enough that she was aware of the warmth of him in the cold air, not so close that it required her to decide anything. "It's done," he said. "I know," she said. "I felt it." She said it before she thought about saying it, and then it was said, and she looked at the river rather than at him. She had felt it, a loosening, somewhere in the vicinity of her sternum, as if something that had been braced against pressure for a very long time had been given permission to release. She had no better explanation for it. She had stopped trying to have better explanations for the things she felt that didn't fit neatly into rational categories. "Fenwick?" she asked. "In custody. The network is being dismantled. The 17 people we identified have been formally released from their bondage and are under territorial protection." He paused. "There will be more to find. It will take time, but the structure is broken." She nodded. "Your brother," he said. "He is free. The labor bond has been formally voided and struck from record. His name is clear. She had known this too. She had known it when Pell had sat across from her at breakfast that morning, with the slightly dazed quality of someone still accustoming themselves to the absence of a weight they had carried so long, they had forgotten it was there. "Thank you," she said. "You did this," Cale said. "I provided the structure. The testimony that broke it open was yours." She looked at him. He was watching the river. His profile in the cold afternoon light was the same as it had been every day she had spent in this camp. Steady, present, containing whatever it contained without performing containment. She had watched him now for more days than she had expected to, and she had found nothing in him that contradicted the first impression she had formed on a forest road, with burned hands and 8 coins, and nowhere to go. That consistency was, she had decided, either the most trustworthy thing about him, or the most dangerous. She was still deciding which. "There is something I need to tell you," he said. She waited. "I have known since the road," he said. "Since the moment I saw you in the trees." He said it with the same quality he brought to everything, direct, without artifice, giving her the information without dressing it in strategy. The wolf knew before I reached you. That is why it stayed with you. That is why it has not left your side. The river moved. A bird called somewhere in the trees behind them. I know what you are to me, he said. I am not telling you this to claim anything. I am telling you because you deserve to have the truth and decide what to do with it yourself. Nellie was quiet for a long time. She thought about the word mate and everything it carried, the weight of it, the history of it, the way it had been used in her presence as a concept that belonged to other people, people with bloodlines and bonds, and a place in the world that was documented and recognized and protected. She thought about Harwick's letter, unmarked, unbonded, as if those were the same as worthless. She thought about Cale on the bench beside her that first night, leaving the silence open. She thought about him stopping when she stepped back. She thought about 8 days of watching a man be exactly what he appeared to be. No gap, no seam, no letter waiting to be read by candlelight that said something different from everything else. She thought about her burned hands and what they had cost her, and what they had in the end led her to. I'm not ready, she said. I know, he said. I may not be ready for a long time. I know that too. She looked at him. You're very calm about it. Something moved across his face. The thing that was almost a smile, and never quite became one. You are worth being calm about, he said. You are worth waiting for. She looked back at the river. She sat with it. The truth of what he was telling her. The truth of what she already knew. The truth of the thing she had been locking carefully back into place every time it tried to surface. It was not a small thing. It was enormous. And it was terrifying. And it was real in the particular way that only the things she hadn't chosen could be real. But she had always been honest with herself, even when honesty was inconvenient. I don't want to be somewhere I'm not wanted, she said finally. I have spent my whole life being somewhere I wasn't wanted. I won't do it again. You are wanted, he said simply, in every way that matters. She closed her eyes for a moment. Then she opened them, and she looked at her scarred left palm, and she thought about 9 years old and learning to shrink, and 10 years of stone floors, and a burning curtain, and 8 coins, and a moonless night, and a silver wolf in a dark forest choosing to stay. Ask me again, she said quietly. In time, when I am certain. I will wait, he said. Spring came to the Northern Territories in stages. First the frost retreating from the south-facing slopes, then the river running fast and cold with snowmelt. Then the particular morning when the air changed quality entirely and smelled of new earth and something green working its way back up through the dark. Nellie noticed all of it. She had been given a formal role in Cale's household. Not servant, not ward, not any of the categories she had previously occupied. His legal counsel had drafted a document that named her as a protected resident of the Alpha King's household, with full rights of testimony, petition, and movement. She had read it 3 times before signing it, checking every clause, and Cale had watched her do this from across the table, with an expression of complete, undisguised respect that she had filed away and taken out to examine several times since. Pell had been offered work with the territorial courier system, clean work, well paid, with the freedom to move that his nature required. He was good at it. She had known he would be. He came to find her every few days when he was in the camp, and they sat together in a way that required no performance, no management, no careful geometry of distance, and she felt, in those moments, the particular sensation of something that had been broken beginning to knit. The silver wolf slept outside her door every night. She had stopped pretending it was the wind. It was an evening in late spring, warm enough for the pavilion sides to be rolled up, the air carrying pine and river water, and the distant sweetness of something blooming in the meadow beyond the ridge. When Nellie went to find Cale, he was at the council table alone, reading dispatches by the last of the evening light. He looked up when she came in, and the thing that happened in his face when he saw her was quiet and immediate and entirely without performance, and she had stopped pretending she didn't see it. She sat down across from him. "Ask me now," she said. He was still for a moment. Then he set down the dispatch. "Nellie," he said. Her name in his voice had a quality she had no word for. Not possession, not claim, but something that held her like solid ground holds a person who has been walking in uncertain terrain for a very long time. "Will you be mine? Not by destiny. Not because of what the wolf knows, but because you choose it." She looked at him across the table, at the man who had stopped moving when she stepped back, who had told her the truth when the truth was complicated, who had given her brother back to her and built her a structure from which to fight, and waited with the patience of something that understood what waiting was for. "Yes," she said. It was a small word. It contained everything. The bond was completed under the full moon, in the meadow beyond the ridge, with the silver wolf watching from the tree line, and Pell standing at the edge of the clearing, with the expression of someone witnessing a thing being repaired that he had not known could be repaired. There was no ceremony beyond the choosing. There did not need to be. Afterward, they stood together in the long grass with the moonlight on the meadow, and the smell of pine and new earth, and the particular clean cold of a spring night, and Nellie felt the bond settle into her, not as a constraint, not as a loss of anything, but as the opposite. An addition, a deepening, a warmth in the center of her chest that had nothing to do with proximity and everything to do with certainty. She was not who she had been. She was not the girl who had learned to shrink. She was not the servant who carried things without putting them down. She was not unmarked, undocumented, unworthy of complication. She was Nellie, scarred hands and all, who had walked out of a burning room and out of a burning house, and through a moonless forest, and into the life that had been, all along, waiting for her to find it. The Alpha King of the Northern Territories took her scarred hand in both of his, and held it with the careful, deliberate gentleness of someone who understood exactly what it had cost. She let him. Harwick was tried before the full territorial council in midsummer and stripped of his holding, his title, and every arrangement he had constructed. Fenwick followed. The network they had built together was dismantled completely. Every forged document voided, every false bond struck from record, every person it had touched given the legal standing they had always deserved. The adjudicator who had heard Nellie's testimony presided. It took 4 days. Nellie attended every session, not out of cruelty, out of the understanding that some things needed to be witnessed fully to be finished fully. She sat in the formal gallery with her hands in her lap, the left one scarred, both of them steady, and she watched justice be done with the quiet, total attention she brought to all things that mattered. When it was over, she walked out into the summer afternoon and stood in the courtyard for a moment with her face turned up to the sun. Kyle found her there. He stood beside her and said nothing, because nothing was needed, and she leaned into the solid warmth of him and let the weight of it, all of it, every year, every stone floor, every burned hour, settle fully and finally into the past, where it belonged. It was done. She was Luna of the Northern Territories. She was Pell's sister, and the Silver Wolf's chosen, and the woman who had burned her hands saving a child, and walked out of the dark and found, on the other side of everything, a life that was entirely and completely her own. The sun was warm. The meadow beyond the courtyard smelled of summer. She was home.